African genius this session is an award-winning and world-renowned writer all the way from beautiful Kenya. This African gem was, however, not appreciated in his own country, and even that is an understatement because this African gem was detained, imprisoned, exiled. Yet the message he carries is internationally recognized even in non-African countries. He has withstood the consequences of speaking an undiluted truth, and till this day, the truths that he shared continue to stand. Join us in the appreciation of Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo's views, and here follows our top 10. Do support the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, smashing that bell notification button, and your comments are always highly appreciated. Let's jump right into it. Number 1, the threat of speaking your own language.
A little bit about the background. I had written a play and performed a play in Gikuyu language, performed by a community outside Nairobi, and the play was stopped on November 1977, and on December 31st, the same year, I was abducted from my home and found myself in a maximum security prison the following day. The new year of 1978, I was in a maximum security prison, a prisoner without a name. I'd published other things in English. I used to write in English, for instance, and I'd published, I think, The River Between, Weep Not Child, A Grain of Wheat, and Petals of Blood in English. And most of these were really fairly critical of the post-colonial system, okay? But this guy, Kadeda, in Gikuyu, my mother tongue, was my first work in Gikuyu language. Yeah. So I think the language factor was important in my imprisonment.
Abducted and detained for speaking your home language. Interesting. So leave those who work to snatch one's culture, heritage, forcefully dispossess innocent people from their land, and those who colonize a humanity to exert their power. Oh, no, they're doing the world justice. But abduct and detain he who resists, he who holds true the value of their identity. Because he is causing trouble and harm, right? Such a messed up world we live in. Speaking of the effects of colonization to the colonized, Professor Ngugi highlights that the reversal of such is very hard, especially when such decolonization needs to take place in the mind. Professor Ngugi explains.
But the mind is affected much more than just the economic materiality. Yeah, in a sense that there's a tendency for such societies to look for validation from the West. In other words, sometimes the initiatives from within the country are not valued, but if the same initiatives are kind of applauded in European capitals, then people have a tendency to say, oh, that's good, you know. So it's really a mental structure that has to be, that African people have to be aware, yeah, in a way, because what is the colonialism of the economy and colonialism of the politics is easy to detect. The one of the mind is sometimes the harder to either detect, both detect and eradicate, yeah.
Number 3, they say where there's a will, there's a way. If we will to be decolonized, there is a way. Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo presents that the official use, appreciation, and promotion of indigenous languages contributes to the solution of decolonizing the African mind. Let's hear him explain.
Yeah, so the question of languages then becomes very important in this respect, because the languages of power in most post-colonial African countries are still European languages. So whether in Kenya or Senegal, the language of power, that defines knowledge, administration, economic exchange, legal institutions, or legal practice, are still European languages, so African languages become subordinate necessarily to those of Europe. So any decolonization must really address the issue of languages. Yeah. And my formula has been very simple. I keep on telling people when I talk in Kenya, quite frankly, in other African countries, or in the world for that matter, because this applies to many countries that were formerly colonized, that if you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, that is enslavement. That if you know your language or your mother tongue or the language of your culture and then add all the other languages of the world, including European languages, to it, then that's really empowerment. So it's a question of relationship between the languages. That's the issue, because that relationship is the one which was distorted by colonialism.
So the damage was done, and generations later, we still live with the effects of that damage deliberately done. Where to from here? How do we repair things in our current generation in a manner that displays genuine goodness of humanity? Professor Ngugi posits that accountability and pairing apples with apples when analyzing wrongs done is a way towards the solution. He explains on our number 4 genius view how to repair the damage done.
At some point, people must take responsibility.
Even though it's a different generation of British who are paying for this now.
Yeah, I think it's
paying
important.
money to the Kenyans who suffered.
Yeah, but even now, what they are paying, quite frankly, is peanuts. Nothing. It's good. The only good element in this, at least, there's an element of acknowledgement, of the torture, the removal, of genitals, There's one guy, we call him Waitina, but he used to cut off the ears of the dead. And so I don't know what he did with those ears, of the dead.
So is that kind of, that level
that kind of almost brutal, almost like, it was so brutal, it's very difficult actually to quite put it in words,
But the point was, weren't the Mau Mau brutal too? I mean, your brother was a fighter, but the Mau Mau did some brutal things too, didn't they?
No, of course, it's war. They are fighting against an occupier. Let's say you get two guys, you say they are both brutal, but one brutality is in order to oppress, in order to exploit, in order to dominate. The other one is brutality, is in fact to liberate, to get rid of the brutal aggressor. You cannot equate the two. Although in a war, of course, there are, you don't deny that there are, cruelties, but you cannot equate, say, the cruelty of the guy who is oppressing with those who are saying, no, don't sit on my back.
The use of European names by African children is another issue which Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo addresses. This was introduced by European missionaries and presented as a requirement for acceptance into the Christian faith. When better light was shed on this matter, however, it was argued that African names are hard for Europeans to pronounce, never mind to learn anyway. The modern Africans resorted to giving both African and European names to their children to remedy the situation. Professor Ngugi, however, argues that no language is ever necessarily easy to learn, and that even Africans had to adjust to learning English names. Addressing someone by their name the right way is the most basic and yet important sign of respect, and Africans are as equally deserving of such respect as Europeans do. Professor Ngugi elaborates on number 5, value African names.
See, listen, when African people were taken as slaves to America in a slave plantation, the first thing that happened to them, they were stripped of their names. They had to acquire the name of their master.
Yeah, slave master.
Yeah. And when they became masters, they had to acquire the name of the new master. The same mentality was brought into Africa in the colonial era. Okay? Only instead of losing your whole name, they had to give you a European name. The implication being European names are holy or Christian. But why can't Joroge or Nyango or Mutiso be also holy?
So what are you saying about Jeff?
So what are we saying?
Jeff?
Exactly, that's a challenge I have. Jeff is very famous all over the world. But why should Jeff always shadow you? So that any achievement you have, Jeff, the European name, has a share. Right?
Yes.
Do you understand?
I see what you mean.
Why can't we let, Koinange, with the history of Koinange, stand? So that any achievement goes to Koinange. And we can put Jeff aside. Don't you think?
Wow.
Just as I did with James.
James.
And you know what? When I told my publishers, because they'd already published my first two books.
Right. A River Between.
The River Between and Weep Not Child.
Yep.
And a grain of wheat. Under the name James Ngugi.
Yes.
Then I told them, look, I've seen the light. I've seen the light.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I want my books from now on to be under my name, Ngugi Wa Thiongo, which simply means Ngugi, son of Thiongo. It's the name I was given at birth by my mother and my father. And the publishers then, who are based then in London, said, but you can't do that.
Yeah.
James, you are known all over the world.
As James.
As James Ngugi, now what do you do about marketing your books and so on? I said, no, I can't continue with a lie. I saw the light, I can't go back to darkness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I said, let's do it. All my books have to be under Ngugi Wa Thiongo.
But that was a big...
Even the ones which had been published under James.
But that was a big risk, Prof, because Muzungus, when they're shown this name here, the first thing I would say, well, not me, but them, would be Ngugi Wa Thiongo.
That's all right. That's all right. But I don't want to simplify. I don't want to make it easy for them to say my name, any more than they make it easy for me to say their name. When I go to America and they call themselves Johnston or Robertson, I have to say Robertson. And somebody can say Robertson. But okay,
yes.
Right?
Okay.
It's their name.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't simplify it for me and tell me, look, to make it easy for you, we shall call ourselves Ngugi or Joroge or Nyango to make it easy for you. Why do we think we need to make it always easy for the West to understand us? Why can't they take a step to understand us?
Similarly to South African first black president Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, who says it's only impossible until it's done, Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo highlights that the impossible is that which has not been made possible. Will Africa rise again? It is possible. Will Africa be internationally recognized for all the treasure it contributes to humanity? It is possible. In fact, all things are possible. And on number 6, Professor Ngugi shares a personal experience to prove that all things are possible.
The impossible is that which has not been made possible, right?
Yep.
So it's for us as African people to always, even within the rescue the possible from the impossible.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had said earlier, this was the most popular book among Twitter folks out there. They loved The River Between, and they don't know why it hasn't been made into a movie.
Let me tell you about this book a little bit. This book was my first novel. I wrote it in my second year of college at Makerere University, which was then affiliated to the University of London. I remember this because I remember I finished December 31st, 1961. And when I was writing this novel, it was not expected that an African, or even alone a student, would be writing novel books. So there were few sniggers. Oh, look at him. He's writing a novel. Oh, look at him. Okay?
Yeah.
But the key thing is I had to persist and keep the cause. Because as I was telling people at Alliance today, for me, and I think what should be the motto for every African person.
Once again, thank you for tuning in, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, like, share our content, smash that bell notification button, and we would always love to read your comments in the comment section below. Moving on number 7, Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo poses a thought-provocative question to African academics, professionals, well, basically all citizens of Africa, one which is a self-introspection. Having acquired all the knowledge, skill, exposure, and understanding, what contribution are you making in the greater cause of making Africa great? Find where you can contribute and make your contribution.
All this time, The River Between, With My Child, A Grain of Wheat, Petals of Blood were written in English, including 2 plays which I had done, one singly and the other one in collaboration. But in the village, the issue of language cropped up. What language were we going to use if we were going to work in the village, if we were going to connect with the people? So the issue of language confronted me for the first time in a real practical sense. I thought about it before, but it never came as a practical challenge, something which I had to confront. And that's how we came to write the play, develop the play which we called I'll Marry When I Want, Gahika Deda in Kikuyu language. In English translation, of course, I'll marry when I want. You know, the reason why I chose the language, because there's no other way we were going to connect with the community without using the language they were then using. So it's purely a matter of practical necessity that actually we chose the language of that particular community.
You honestly can't listen to Professor Ngugi raise any concerns about Africa without hearing him direct your consideration to how African languages require better respect, appreciation, and use than what has been given to them. On number 8, he highlights how sickening it is that Africans were taught to despise their culture and languages and pursue and uplift those of the West. More alarmingly to note that such is the case in a post-colonial African society. Professor Ngugi elaborates.
Let's look at how we came to be made to feel negative about our languages, or even how we came to be made to believe that our languages are the cause of division among us. Can you see even the very idea that what is our own is enemy to us, and what is not ours is what is a friend to us, or rather, what is ours disunites us, what is not ours brings us together. You know, it's a kind of absurd when you come to think of it. Yeah, there's something illogical here. An African government a post-colonial African government puts me in a maximum security prison for writing or participating in the writing production of a play in an African language, right? I had written other things in English before. I had done plays in English before, which were critical of the post-colonial condition, but I was not, except for once when I was taken to a police station for questioning, I was never put in a maximum, or in a prison for that matter, for doing work in English. Yeah. So it's the illogicality of that situation that made me think there's something wrong here. There's something which does not compute. Okay. And that's when I started looking at the colonial situation, and I came to this conclusion more or less, which later I published in a book called Decolonizing the Mind, okay? And it was this, that in all colonial situations, language has always been a factor in the process of colonization. The colonizer always, in all situations, suppresses the language or the languages of the colonized and elevates their own language.
Right.
And it's true in all African countries. It's true also in some European countries, like say Ireland, for instance. When Ireland was first conquered by the English, when they tried to settle there, for many years they could not conquer the Irish. They could not conquer the Irish. Then in 1585, a well-known English poet called Spenser, he's a contemporary of Shakespeare, wrote a book called A View of Ireland at the Present Time. And this book, quite quick, is a conversation between a visiting English lord from London and an English settler in Ireland. And what are they discussing? Why have we not been able to conquer the Irish? How can we do it? And they come up with two things. One, names. If we can destroy their naming system, how they name themselves, that would be one way, okay? But the other way is language, okay? If you can suppress their language and their naming system, they'll soon forget who they are.
Number 9 on our top genius views of Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo is on his description of the politics of memory. Through this, he shares how preserving memory is a critical component of retaining power. Over to you, Professor Ngugi.
And memory is what makes us who we are. Memories of the past, for instance, is what makes us be able to evaluate the present as we plan for tomorrow. Now, one of the most important of memories is simply the memories of who we are, where we come from. You say our parents or the region in which I was born, the stories I was told, the language I used, as a child, the language of, say, my parents, the language of my community, and so on, And I think what the colonial process does, or any process of domination, is first of all the erasure of the memory of the subjugated, right? You literally erase the memory of who they are, their memories of the past, the memory of their being, as a people. So after erasing that memory, you plant another memory, the memory of the colonizer, or the memory of the one who is dominating. So in that case, the memory of the dominating becomes the beginning of your memory, right? So there's a lot of politics or power politics to do with memory. And we can see this, quite frankly, when people, okay, we can see this when people have colonized another territory. The first thing you do is change actually the name of the territory they have conquered, or dominated. So, for instance, New York becomes not the name of how the place was called by the Native Americans, because there were people before, but called New York in terms of the invading presence, So in America, you had of New England, New Britain, New Haven, New York, New everything. And the same, really, whenever one people have conquered another territory, the first thing they do is actually try to plant their memory on the land that they have, first of all, the geography of what they have conquered, first of all, and thereafter on the body and mind of the conquered. Of course, one of the best ways of establish this memory is literally language.
And if you forget everything that Professor Ngugi Wa Thiongo says, remember this. The continued oppression and enslavement of Africa is done through disvaluing African languages. As an African, you owe it to yourself to preserve your native language in its most genuine state, and thus carry on the memory of all that the language represents. Do enjoy our number 10, and we will be seeing you in the next video. Take care.
Particularly in the case of Africa, it's very, very clear that through language, the Africans who were enslaved in the American and Caribbean plantations, the first thing that happened almost automatically in all of them was the cutting off their linguistic connections to Africa. Whereas the Spanish planter, the Portuguese planter, the English planter, the Dutch, the French, their linguistic connections to Europe are left intact, right? But the African linguistic connection to the continent is cut off, And language is obviously the most important thing about memory. Language is really the keeper. Everybody's language is really the keeper of their memory. Yeah. So we see that happening to African people in the New World, right? So they have to begin to construct new languages where they do not use the language of the master, or try to mix the language of the master with other things, try to find another way of reconnecting with their memory. Yeah.
So that would make it very important, for example, to write in African languages, but there's a new problem there, you might say, where in a globalized world, everybody speaks English if they want to get published.
No, they also speak Russian, and they speak Japanese, and they speak Chinese, and they speak Danish, and they speak Swedish. It's only that after, say, in the case of Denmark, the way I understand it, is like English is almost the second language. But it has not meant the Danish people abandoning Danish. That's the key. In the case of the conquered, they are made to disconnect with their language and connect with an entirely new linguistic system. It's not a question of them retaining their language with all its memories and then adding English or French or Swedish to it. No, it's a question of abandonment. It's a question of their language being completely replaced by English. It's like in the case of Denmark, if English was to completely erase Danish language, from Denmark altogether, so that overnight, all Danish people, although they call themselves Danish, become English speakers without any memory of Danish or what Danish language might have meant for them as a people. But to add another language to what you have, that's That's good. You know, I mean, I'm not a, English is not my native tongue, right? I speak Gikuyu or Kiswahili, but you and I are now conversing in English. But there's no reason we couldn't have been discussing the same in Danish, if I knew Danish, or in Gikuyu, if you knew Gikuyu, or in Kiswahili, if you knew Kiswahili, or in Japanese, if both of us knew Japanese, right? Right. So there's a difference between adding another language to what you already have, which I call empowerment, and what I call the other, where you add many languages. You remove your own language completely, and then you acquire other languages, which I call enslavement. Yeah.